In October 1962, Santos walked into Benfica Stadium and made Europe look smaller. The white shirts moved across the pitch in Lisbon with a calm that did not fit the setting. Benfica were European champions. Eusebio was there. The crowd had come to see whether the team from Brazil, the team of Pelé, could carry its reputation outside South America and face one of Europe's strongest clubs. This was not Brazil arriving through the national team. It was a club side being tested in a place where European football was used to doing the measuring. Santos did not just stand there. They won 5-2. Pelé scored 3, Coutinho scored, and Pepe did too. The match became one of those nights that made the stories harder to dismiss. For anyone in Europe who had heard about Pelé, about Santos, and about Brazilian football producing something different at club level, Lisbon gave them a direct answer. The answer was not subtle, but the scene also gives the story its tension. Santos were not a giant capital club from Rio de Janeiro or Sao Paulo itself. They came from Santos, a coastal city in the state of Sao Paulo, and their home was Vila Belmiro, a stadium far smaller and more intimate than the places where their name began to travel. They had built something extraordinary in a local setting. Then the world started asking for it. That is where Pelé Santos becomes more complicated than a great team winning abroad. Pelé was the obvious center of gravity. He changed the scale of every match he entered. Before he touched the ball, the game already felt different because people had paid just to see him. Promoters could sell his name. Newspapers could build stories around his presence. Opponents could measure themselves against him. A friendly could stop feeling friendly because Pelé was on the pitch. His name did not only draw attention, it changed the terms around Santos. A match with Pelé in it could be priced, promoted, and remembered differently before the first pass was played.
But Santos were not a one-man exhibition. Coutinho played close to Pelé, like a shared instinct made visible. Their combinations were short, quick, and cruel to defenders who thought they had a second longer than they did. Pepe gave the left wing force and distance, with a shot that could change the feeling of a match from long range. Zito gave the team authority in midfield. Mengálvio helped the rhythm breathe. Gilmar brought the calm of a goalkeeper who already belonged to World Cup history. That matters because Santos were not just sending a famous player into the world, they were carrying a team. For an international audience, that distinction matters. Brazilian football often reached the world through the national team, the yellow shirt, the World Cup, the idea of Brazil as a country that played beautifully when the planet was watching. Santos offered another route. Here was Brazilian football in club form, not as a 4-year event, not as a national symbol assembled for a tournament, but as something built in daily club life and then carried across borders. The world wanted to see it up close, and Santos learned that being wanted could become a way of life. Vila Belmiro was home. It held the club's origins, its local crowd, its everyday meaning. It was the place where Santos belonged before it became a name foreign spectators recognized. But the club's football had created a value that home could no longer hold. The team was too attractive, too marketable, too rare. The larger stages were elsewhere, and they paid better. So Santos traveled. They traveled for official competitions, for prestige matches, for friendlies that were never just friendlies once Pelé appeared on the team sheet. They traveled because crowds abroad wanted the white shirt in their stadium. They traveled because the club could turn its football into revenue.
They traveled because Brazilian club football could admire, celebrate, and produce Santos, but could not fully sustain the financial value the club had created. That is the quiet pressure underneath the glory. The simple memory is easier. Santos went abroad and dazzled people. Pelé scored goals. The white shirt became a moving symbol of Brazilian excellence. The club beat great opponents and made foreign stadiums feel, for one night, connected to Vila Belmiro. That memory is not false. It survives because the football gave people something real to hold on to.
But travel was not weightless. A team has bodies. Players have legs, sleep schedules, injuries, recovery, boredom, irritation, and the small discomforts that never appear in the highlights. Santos's global life meant airports, hotels, unfamiliar pitches, changing climates, and another crowd waiting for the promise to be fulfilled. The team was not just admired, it was scheduled, it was sold. It was expected to be Santos again, wherever it landed. Authoritatively, that expectation shaped the players' lives. Every trip carried pride. There was genuine force in a Brazilian club walking into distant stadiums and making people look at its football with seriousness. Santos gave foreign crowds a club version of Brazil they could see in person. The players were not just passing through as entertainers. They were showing that Brazilian club football had produced a team of global quality. Still, pride did not remove the cost. The more Santos proved its worth abroad, the more invitations came. The more invitations came, the more the club's calendar stretched out on the road. Success widened the map. Prestige created more demand. The team's greatness did not simply return home and rest. It created another reason to leave. This is why the story cannot rest solely on Pelé's genius. Pelé explains the attraction. He does not explain the whole condition. If Santos had been just Pelé and 10 supporting figures, the story would belong mostly to biography. But the team was too complete for that. Its football had a collective shape. The world came for Pelé, but the value of the trip depended on Santos making Pelé's greatness feel connected to something larger. That larger thing had been formed at home. The paradox is that Santos had to leave home in order to keep proving what home had produced. Vila Belmiro gave the story its ground, but the road gave the club its global scale. The team belonged emotionally to its city, yet more and more of its memory was built elsewhere. A match in Lisbon, a match in Milan, a match in some other stadium where the crowd may have known Pelé before it knew anything about Santos as a place. Over time, the white shirt became easy to detach from the city. It could mean Pelé. It could mean Brazilian skill. It could mean the era when a Brazilian club could appear almost anywhere and make the local night feel historic. That made Santos powerful in memory, but it also made the club easy to simplify. The small coastal origin, the domestic limits, the financial pressure, the fatigue of travel, all of that could disappear behind the cleaner image of a team constantly welcomed by the world. The official victories helped protect Santos from becoming just a touring attraction. The Intercontinental Cup matches against Benfica and Milan gave the story weight. These were not empty exhibition matches. They were contests against clubs with their own standing, their own champions, and their own public expectation. When Santos won those matches, Brazilian club football was being measured directly against Europe's best. And Santos did not look small.
The 1962 performance against Benfica is still the sharpest image because it contains so much of the story in one night. Santos abroad, Pelé at the center, Coutinho and Pepe beside him. A European champion forced to understand that the visitor was not there for decoration. A club from the Brazilian coast making itself legible to a crowd that could no longer treat the stories as exaggeration.
The next year, against Milan, the story became rougher. Santos lost the first match 4-2 in Italy, then won 4-2 at the Maracanã before taking the decisive playoff. Pelé's injury meant the team had to get through the tie without his presence settling everything. That matters because Santos's global image was not built solely on effortless displays. It was also built through uncomfortable matches, through pressure, and through the need to keep proving the club's level when conditions were not ideal.
Those nights helped make Santos more than a touring myth. They showed a team that could be bruised and still remain serious. A team that could travel under the weight of its own name and still find a result. The beauty was there, but it did not remove the strain. Yet even those official victories point back to the same pressure. Once the world sees you clearly, it asks to see you again. For Santos, visibility became opportunity, and opportunity became dependency. That is the part hidden inside the romance. The world valued the team, but often through appearances. A visit, a match, 90 minutes of proof. Santos had to turn those appearances into money, status, and continuity. The club's football opened doors, but those same doors kept pulling it away from the ground that had made the football possible. This was not abandonment. It was imbalance. Home still mattered. Vila Belmiro was not replaced by Lisbon, Milan, or any other foreign stage. But home could no longer be the whole frame. Santos had become too valuable for a purely local life. The club's greatness created a wider economy around itself, and that economy lived partly on the road. The players carried that economy with their feet. When Pelé received the ball abroad, he was not just a genius performing for new eyes. He was also the reason the trip made sense. When Coutinho combined with him, when Pepe struck from the left, and when Zito held the team together, they were doing the work that allows Santos to remain valuable. The football was beautiful, but it was also labor under expectation. That is the human part of the structure, not a theory. A body asked to perform again because the club needed the performance to keep meaning what it meant. Santos's global life also points towards something Brazilian football would see more often later. Brazilian talent has often been most profitable when valued from the outside. In later decades, players would leave younger. European clubs would become stronger magnets. The market would learn how to separate the player from the Brazilian club more efficiently. Santos belonged to an earlier form of that story, when the team itself traveled, before the world fully learned how to extract the talent from the team. That makes Pelé's Santos unusual. They were a club side with the reach of a global attraction. They were not simply supplying players to the world. They were taking the club to the world, again and again, while still carrying the name of a specific Brazilian city. For a time, the world did not get Pelé without Santos. It got Pelé inside Santos, inside those white shirts, those combinations, those teammates, and that shared rhythm. There is beauty in that. There is also strain. The strain is easy to miss because the images remain bright. Pelé scoring, Santos lifting trophies, foreign crowds watching with the satisfaction of having seen the real thing, the white shirt moving through stadiums that seem, in memory, to belong briefly to Santos. These images survive because they deserve to survive. But the deeper meaning sits behind them. Santos showed that a Brazilian club could belong to the world. It also showed that belonging to the world could pull a club away from itself. The team became global because it was excellent, but excellence had to be converted into travel, appearances, revenue, and repetition. The club did not leave home because home stopped mattering. It left because home could not fully finance what Santos had become. That is why the road belongs at the center of the story. Not as scenery, not as adventure, as the condition that made the era possible. Pelé's Santos were formed in Brazil, loved in Santos, and recognized across the world. Their greatness made them portable. Their portability made them valuable. Their value made staying home insufficient. And somewhere inside that cycle, the road stopped being an interruption and became part of the club's identity. Vila Belmiro remained the source. The white shirt kept returning to it for meaning, even when the schedule carried it elsewhere. But the memory of Pelé Santos is not confined to one ground. It is spread across stadiums, countries, and nights when a small coastal club made the world look toward Brazilian club football. The club had to leave home, and by leaving so often, it became one of the clearest examples of what Brazilian football could give the world and what the world could demand in return.